Hey, I'm Axel, and I had some thoughts about how to get things done. So naturally, as one does, I submitted those to Notebook LM by Google and AI, and I got its insights.
Ever feel torn between like that huge dream you have, the kind of thing that keeps you up at night, and then, just building something real brick by brick?
Yeah, I get it. It's that classic push and pull.
Right. It's like, do I reach for the castle in the clouds or do I like get real and become a master bricklayer? Which honestly is what led us to this whole deep dive, right?
Definitely. And it's something I think a lot of folks listening can relate to, for sure.
Totally. One of our listeners wrote in about this very thing, this feeling of being stuck between those two approaches. So let's unpack that, dive in a bit. First off, that whole castle in the clouds idea, there's a certain kind of magic to that, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. It's that grand vision, that
Yeah.
feeling of striving for something big, something more.
Exactly. But, and I'm curious to get your take on this, is there a downside to that constant upward gaze?
Well, I think one of the biggest risks is that it can be really tough to track progress when your goalpost is, well, basically the horizon.
That makes total sense.
Right. If you're always focused on what's next, what's bigger, it's easy to miss those crucial milestones along the way.
It's like you never really stop to celebrate the wins,
Exactly. And it can also, honestly, lead to a lot of self-doubt. Like if you're not careful, that castle in the clouds can start to feel more like a weight than a source of inspiration.
That's so true. And our listener actually touched on that a bit. They said, and I'm paraphrasing here, it's brutally hard to know if I'm even on the right path when the goal feels miles high. Which kind of leads us to the flip side, right? The whole brick by brick approach to life. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, on the plus side, there's something really satisfying about tangible progress, about setting smaller goals, hitting them, and then using that momentum to keep building.
Oh, for sure. Nothing beats that feeling of actually getting stuff done.
Totally.
Yeah.
But the danger with the brickmaker approach, and I've seen this happen, is that you can get too comfortable. You get so good at laying those bricks that you kind of lose sight of the bigger picture.
It's like you accidentally build a wall around yourself instead of a stepping stone to something greater.
Precisely. And it can be tough to break out of that once you're in it. In fact, our listener even mentioned that they're worried about becoming, and I'm quoting them directly here, a stressed out owner of a small business that does other than what you dreamed of.
Which I think perfectly captures that fear so many people have, right? That if you focus too much on the practical, you might end up sacrificing those big, audacious dreams. So how do we find that balance then? How do we keep our eyes on the prize, so to speak, while still making sure we're building on solid ground?
Right, and I think our listener might actually be onto something with their incremental growth strategy. They talked about focusing on building certain things first, kind of like laying the groundwork, before taking on those riskier ventures.
Could you elaborate on that a bit? What exactly does that look like in practice?
Sure, so they talked about achieving financial independence first, then really honing their leadership skills, like getting really good at managing people and projects, and finally building a strong, reliable team around them.
It's like they're creating this, a safety net, but one that can also act as a launching pad later on.
Exactly. They're not just building a business, they're building themselves up, acquiring those resources and skills that'll be invaluable no matter what they do next.
Okay, I'm really liking this approach. It's strategic, it's proactive, it's like they're playing the long game here,
Exactly.
But it does bring up another question, and maybe this is something you can speak to. They mentioned tackling incrementally bigger, harder things, but how do you actually define that? What's the yardstick?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it comes down to finding that sweet spot, the space between what's comfortable and what completely freaks you out.
So pushing yourself, but not to the point of breaking.
Exactly. And honestly, that's going to look different for everyone, right? It's all about that personal challenge level.
Totally. Reading through our listeners' email, there was something else they mentioned that really struck me. They were talking about how much of a role luck plays in all of this.
Oh, absolutely. That's the wild card, isn't it?
Right. And it made me realize that no matter how much we plan or how strategically we build, there will always be those external forces at play, things we just can't control.
100%. And that actually ties into a final thought I'll leave you with. How much of this balancing act, this whole castle versus brick dilemma, how much of that is actually within our control? And how much of it is, well, just the luck of the draw?
It's such a great question to consider. And on that note, to all our listeners out there, whether you're building a business, a skill set, a life, whatever it is, remember, It's okay to aim for those castles in the clouds. Just make sure you've got some solid bricks under your feet. Who knows, the two might just depend on each other.